Welcome, everyone. It's so great to see so many of you. And as I just posted, don't forget to put your questions for Dr. Miller in the chat. Dr. Miller will be joining us after this video for some live question and answer, which will be fun. So talking with Dr. Miller is such an honor and a privilege for all of us. She is the mother of shelter medicine, and throughout her career, she's forged bold new paths for veterinarians and especially for women of color. She's won many awards, many accolades, not the least of which is our 2021 Avanzino Leadership Award. Her list of accomplishments is formidable, and you'll learn more about it in a minute. Today, it's an opportunity for us to get to know Dr. Lila Miller a little better and to ask her some questions about issues that are important to you. But first, we sat down with Dr. Lila Miller a few weeks ago to talk about not only her amazing life and accomplishments, but also her perspective on the role of diversity, equity, and inclusion in animal welfare. Let's have a look.
It's truly an honor to have been asked to participate in Maddie's Candid Conversations. I'm a retired veterinarian. I spent 42 years at the ASPCA, where I went to work right after I graduated from Cornell. I started out working in the shelter, and from the shelter, I moved into various roles at the ASPCA. So over the years, I ran a clinic for the ASPCA in a highly impoverished area in Brooklyn, New York, which was trying to provide low-cost but high-quality veterinary care in an underserved area. And when that clinic closed, I went to work at the headquarters at the ASPCA, where I went to work in the animal sciences department. And that's where I was able to really share the knowledge that I had gained from working in the shelter for so many years. I wrote a guidelines for the actual ASPCA shelters for their healthcare programs. And I was challenged to do a lot of things that as a veterinarian, I had no clue how to do. I organized a dangerous dog summit that tried to invite experts from around the country to discuss what we used to call the pit bull problem, which we'd been working on for years. I was then asked to teach at Cornell a course in shelter medicine, which was another challenge for me because I don't know anything about teaching. I know about shelter medicine, but I was encouraged to move into that role. And from there, everything that I focused on was really about shelter medicine. I was born and raised in Harlem, lived there all my life. That's where I currently live. My parents were middle-class working family. I had my mother sold tokens in the subway. My father was a tailor. He worked for a clothing store. He pressed clothes and did tailoring. So I was very blessed that as a child living in Harlem, I went to an elementary school that was an experimental program. So it was run by the City University of New York. And by the time I reached 5th grade, we had basically completed the curriculum. So when I got to 6th grade, that was sort of almost like a free year where we got to try and experiment with a lot of different things. And I think one of the pivotal things in my life was being told to take an exam to get into Hunter College High School, which I didn't know anything about, but I was told, take this test. And at the time, I didn't know that it was one of the best high schools in New York City, that it was run by the Department of Higher Education, and that this was a highly competitive test. The high school was largely white. And I remember the principal of the school telling my mother, don't get your hopes up. She's not going to pass the test. And so when I did, that was one of those defining moments when, okay, I'm going to Hunter High School. I didn't really know what that meant. We lived in Harlem. Our lives were based in Harlem, and we seldom went out to Lower Manhattan or anything. So it was like the first time I get on the bus and I go to this high school on Park Avenue, and I'm in class with Joyce Brothers' daughter. These were like people from all over the city, really high performing kids. And I was kind of thrust into this atmosphere where I had been at a predominantly Black elementary school, and now I was the only Black student in my class. I'm one of those veterinarians that always wanted to be a veterinarian. From age 5, I knew I wanted to be a veterinarian. In fact, I remember them teaching me that what the word was for animal doctor was veterinarian. And so everything I did was geared towards getting me into vet school. And we had my high school guidance counselor tried to discourage me from that. He just was saying to me, Lila, you could be anything you want. This was in 1969, where the civil rights movement was really active. That he said you could go to any college you want. They're looking for qualified Black students. You could go to Yale. I can get you in. But I said I have to go to Cornell, and that was because Cornell was the only veterinary college in New York State. And I had a New York State Region scholarship. I had money, it's closer to home. And I knew there would be pressure at Cornell, but I had no idea what I was getting into. The reason I was so set on going to Cornell was because my uncle was a graduate of the Industrial and Labor Relations College, and he was also the first state commissioner of human rights under Nelson Rockefeller. So he had contacted Cornell, some of the members of the board of trustees, and said, my niece wants to be a vet. What advice would you give her? And they told him to tell me to not apply to Cornell because Cornell didn't take Black people. So, armed with that information and being an optimist and maybe being a little bit naive, I said, well, I'm going to go there because that tells me I need to be on site at Cornell. So I applied, I got in based on my grades. I hated Cornell. It was so much pressure. It was a real pressure cooker. And I thought, I want to do this program as quickly as I can so I can get out of here. And instead of taking 4 years, I took 3 years to do the pre-vet program, which meant that I was in class every day from 8 until 4:30. And you had counselors, they would give us student counselors. And when he saw my program, he said, this is a mistake. You can't do this. Nobody does this. You're taking 3 science classes in 1 year. With lab classes, you've got a schedule here where you're in class from 8 to 4:30. You don't even have a lunch break in here. You can't do this. But my mother always said I have a stubborn streak, and I said, well, I'm going to try because I don't think I want to be here for 8 years. Let me try and do this in 7. And then the opportunity came in our junior year to do a year abroad in England. And I grabbed at that opportunity because I said that cuts my time at Cornell down even more to just 6 years. Getting the experience was a real obstacle for me because you have to have worked for a vet or with a vet or had animal experience, and I didn't have any. I literally went through the phone book calling every vet in New York City to say, could I come and spend some time in your practice? And they all said no until I got to T. And this was another turning point in my life, was calling up Dr. Joseph Tate. He had a practice at 145th Street, which was about 20 blocks from where I grew up. And I called and I said, can I come over and see your practice and maybe, do some work for you? And he said, I don't have anything. And so I said, well, can I at least come over and meet you? You're in my neighborhood. And he stopped dead in his tracks. And in his Jamaican accent, it was just like, are you a sister? And I'm like, yes. And he said, get your ass over here now. And so that got me the small animal practice, but there was still the large animal practice that I had to get. And I had no clue how I was going to get that. And I was working with the national board of the YWCA. And it seems like I'm digressing here, but these women were so supportive of me. They had recruited me to help them develop a program for teenagers. And I was saying, I don't know where I'm going to get this large animal experience. And somebody there said, I have a friend who works at a summer camp and they have a little farm, and I could probably get you a job at the farm. That's how I got my large animal experience. And oddly enough, I got there. I thought I was going to be working under somebody. I was it. I was the farm keeper. So I had a horse, I had a calf, I had some rabbits, I had ducks, I had chickens, I had sheep. And you could just imagine, I'm a city kid. I got to take care of all of these animals. And they're thinking because I'm pre-vet, I know something. And I'm like, I don't, but I managed to get through it. Through the YWCA, I probably learned more about racism from a sort of an academic and a philosophical and a practical point, not from experience, but having these women who were policymakers. They were going down to Washington, they were lobbying, and they explained things to me about racism that I hadn't heard and that I didn't believe, because the YWCA had one imperative, which was the elimination of racism by any means necessary. I had gone to their convention in 1970 in Houston, where they had a whole public policy platform of things they wanted to work on. And the Black women at that meeting got up and said, you need to throw out that agenda. She said, what we need to work on is the elimination of racism by any means necessary. And that's where I learned about institutionalized racism and the difference between racial prejudice and racism. And so many of the lessons that I learned helped me survive Cornell, because being the first, African-American woman, along with my best friend, Rochelle, and I went through the whole pre-vet veterinary experience at Cornell. So we were the first two African-American women to graduate from Cornell's program. And I didn't really understand the significance of that. Because I said, I didn't get in here through affirmative action. I got here because I met all the requirements, but when I actually got to Cornell, not only were we the first two African-American women in the class, we were in a class that opened up for women. When my class got there were 14 of us. And for a lot of the faculty at Cornell, that was the beginning of the end of veterinary medicine. We were just going to ruin the profession. So we sort of had that double whammy working against us, where we not only were Black, but we were women. And there were a lot of challenges. I won't name all of the things that happened, but one of the most significant things that actually led me to go work in a shelter was in my junior year. I think it was, I was very sick. I had asthma, and I was having asthma attacks all the time. And I had a really severe asthma attack. I ended up in the hospital. They told me I almost died, and that I would probably be allergic to dogs and cats within a few years. When they tested me, I reacted to everything. They said they'd never seen anything like it. This is the only thing I didn't react to that they tested me for probably was air. So they said, you're going to be allergic to dogs and cats soon. So when I went to the dean and I said, I might not be able to finish this, he said to me, well, Lila, I'm going to be frank with you. If you don't finish, they're not going to let any more Black people in here. And I was stunned. And I said to him, you can't say that to me. That's not fair. He said, doesn't matter whether it's fair or not. He said, I'm not flunking out. Okay, I have a real severe health problem, and I don't know that I want to risk my life to achieve this childhood dream. And he says, they're not going to look at why you left. They're going to look at the fact that you left, and they're going to say, hey, this was a candidate who went to an all-white high school. She met all the academic criteria. She went to Cornell undergraduate. She could withstand the social pressures of being, in a virtually all-white university. Everything was in her favor, and she didn't make it. So I said, all right, I'll finish. But by the time I finished, I was finished with veterinary medicine. I literally was saying, I don't want anything more to do with Cornell. I don't want anything to do with this profession. On graduation day, one of my professors congratulated me and he took me aside and he said, my hat's off to you, Lila. He said, if I had had you as an undergraduate student, I would have told you, don't be a veterinarian. Part of me couldn't understand because I said, I didn't come here to be a trailblazer. I didn't come here to do anything other than graduate, be a veterinarian, and go back home and work. So when I graduated, I said, I got, what else can I do? You know, the YWCA was telling me, come work for us. And I said, I don't have any people skills. I don't know what you think I could do. And they're saying, we'll teach you. We want you. I had been so actively involved with them. And they were the ones that really, besides family and friends who gave me total support, I would come home from Ithaca and I would go and I would see them and they would explain to me, I would tell them something that had happened and they would explain, that's racism, Lila. That's not a failing on your part. You're not, it's not because you can't do the work. These are real obstacles that they're putting in your way. And that's what we mean by institutionalized racism. When I graduated and I said, I'm going to try and do an internship, but I went to one of my professors and I asked for a recommendation. And he said to me, I'll give you a recommendation, but it won't be a good one. And I said, well, how does that work? And he said, well, my fear is that, you know, he knew about my asthma. He says, I don't think that you'll be able to stand up to the rigors of an internship. And my fear is that they'll give it to you because you're Black rather than to some of the other maybe more qualified students. And I said to him, don't you think that should be up to AMC? I was applying for Animal Medical Center. Don't you think it should be their decision? And he said, well, I'll write it for you. So like I said, it just won't be that good. So I said, well, thank you, but no, thank you. And I found another professor to write me a recommendation. So I wanted the ASPCA because the ASPCA was more diverse, but they had ended their internship program. So I said, I'm done. Let me do something else. And it was Dr. Tate who said, before you throw your career and your life stream away, come work for me at the ASPCA. And I was like, oh, I used to go with him on rounds to the various shelters. And I'm like, no. He says, well, you don't have to do it for the rest of your life. Just do it for a while. He says, I really need somebody smart, somebody I can trust to go in and create a healthcare program. He says, I'm going to work with you on it. I'll help guide you. Because that was the other thing. They never mentioned, I don't think the word shelter ever was mentioned when I was in vet school. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that. And he said, yes, you do. You know, so I said, all right, well, I'll try it out. And that 6-month experiment turned into 42 years. I found my niche. I said, this is where I need to be. The shelter at that point was basically a giant holding pen. We just had animals in colony cages and they would pick out 1 or 2 randomly that somebody liked and said, let's place them for adoption. So when I got there, it was, okay, we're gonna vaccinate animals. We're gonna separate animals out. We're gonna examine every animal. Every animal's gonna get a little like medical record. When we started it, it looked like this is gonna be impossible. There's just so many animals coming through the system. But if you set up a system and you have the support of the president of the ASPCA who said, we're going to do this. And, you know, other managers who were skeptical, but basically Dr. Tate and John Kohlberg said, I want you to listen to what Lila says. That's how we got things done. Working at the shelter when parvovirus was first discovered. And we would just come in and we would just find dogs dead with bloody diarrhea. And even though we were accustomed to, you know, having an occasional animal die in its cage, we were seeing it repeated over and over again. And veterinary science was desperately trying to figure out what was going on. And we were trying to figure out what was going on and just trying all kinds of things, isolating animals, trying to do quarantine in a facility that didn't have quarantine facilities. It really felt like at times this must be what it's like when you're at war and you don't have any resources, but you're doing your best to save animals. And thank God we weathered that storm. They when they finally figured out about parvo and we started vaccinating, and were able to reduce those deaths. From there, Dr. Tate came to me and he said, "We want to start a clinic and we want you to run it." And I said, I'm 5 years out of veterinary school. I've kind of lost that clinical edge about talking to people. I've always worked with animals behind the scenes. And it was, again, no, we want you to do this. And it was an experimental clinic because the ASPCA was running a big hospital in Manhattan, but they didn't have any services, like medical services, at any of the other shelters that they were running in the other boroughs. So Brooklyn was a testing ground. And I had been told, again, there's no pressure here. The board of directors didn't really feel that Black people and Hispanic people cared about pets. They would not come to the clinic. They thought it was a waste of time to even try. Well, Dr. Tate was running a successful clinic in Harlem, and his clientele were Black people and Hispanic people. And he said, "It's one thing I know, I know business." He said, you give me a shot. You let me set up a clinic in Brooklyn. Dr. Miller's going to run it. I'm going to, help her run it. And if we don't make money, shut us down. So the hospital in Manhattan had a huge operating deficit. They were hemorrhaging money. They were always losing money. But he made the challenge and he said, "Give us a shot at it. We're going to make money." And we did. Much to my surprise, I was like stunned. I was scared to death. But despite this notion that those people don't bond with their animals, they're not going to come, we had to turn people away. That little clinic that started with just me and one receptionist and one animal handler expanded twice. We had to we had to set up a surgical suite. We had to get in an x-ray machine. We ended up hiring 2 other veterinarians. We did inpatient hospitalizations for parvo. And then the next step was to do spay neuter. And so we started spaying and neutering and then doing other minor outpatient surgical procedures as well. And so we proved that wherever you got this notion that these people don't care about their pets, as I said, we often had to turn people away just because we didn't have the capacity. And what kept me at the ASPCA for many years when things were rough was that I didn't have to do economic euthanasia. Okay, the ASPCA at one point had said, if people come to the clinic and you interview them and they are sincere in trying to help their animals with their medical problems, then we're going to help them. And there's no greater reward to me than being able to save an animal when the owner says to you, "I've only got $50. And I said, "Well, the bill's going to be $250. And they say, "Well, let me see if I can borrow some money, or maybe I won't pay the rent this month." And I was able to say to them, "ASPCA is going to help you. Give me what you can, and we'll do the rest." And that was very gratifying to be able to save animals' lives. And sometimes we couldn't save the animals' lives, but people were grateful that we tried. They had no place else to go. And then when the clinic was closed, because the ASPCA gave up its contract for animal control, that's when I moved on to work under Steve Zawistowski in Animal Sciences Department. And that led to teaching the course at Cornell, and then teaching a class, the first class on shelter medicine on the VIN, on the Veterinary Information Network, because we were amazed at how many vets would show up at the American Humane Association for these classes because they weren't available anyplace else. So we took a vote at the meeting in 2001 and said, "We want to form a association. What do you think?" And of course, everybody said yes. And so that's when we started the Association of Shelter Vets. And so But in the beginning, it was just me. And I was creating all these handouts. And I always felt like that was kind of like bogus. I remember when I was in vet school, I didn't like learning from handouts. I wanted a textbook. And I said, it'd be great to have a textbook. And from that conversation, about 2-3 weeks later, Steve said to me, I've got a publisher for you. Let's do the book. So he and I worked on the first shelter medicine textbook together. When I talk to veterinarians, I always say to them, you may have set in your head what you think you want to do with your career, but be open to new things. I didn't want to go to the shelter. If you told me I'd be there for 42 years, I would never have believed it. Getting on the New York State Board was another milestone in my career. Because again, I didn't want anything to do with organized veterinary medicine. But once again, Dr. Tate was on the state board and he said, you need to be on the board. We need people of color. We need women. And we need somebody from the animal welfare community. I was nominated and you get appointed by the governor. And I served on the New York State Board for 10 years. And that gave me an opportunity to advocate on behalf of shelter medicine because there wasn't anybody else on the board. I was always there to advocate for our position and to educate because, there was always this notion that, the shelters, they're just terrible places. And, it's a place where veterinarians go when they're retired or getting ready to die. And it's just not a real career option. And we certainly managed to turn that around when shelter medicine became a specialty in 2014. And you look at what's happening in veterinary medicine today, and it's the most racially segregated, the whitest profession of the healthcare professions. We have the highest suicide rate. We have huge mental health issues. I'm saying, but look at the characteristics of the people that you're admitting, and are those people that are at higher risk for suffering when they're not successful in what they do, because you're looking at highly motivated, highly successful people. And when veterinary medicine doesn't necessarily measure up to what they hoped it would be, what sort of resources do they have to draw on to help them survive? Cornell is actively working to address some of these issues. They recently formed a Black veterinarians network, and there's a multicultural association. And in talking to them, and they asked me to tell the stories, and I said, but that was then, and they're telling me, Lila, it's still happening today, 40 years later, which is sad and says to me, there's work to be done. When I got on the New York State Board, they would rotate their meetings, and I had to go back to Ithaca. The first and only time I've ever been called the N-word was up in Ithaca, thinking that, wait a minute, I'm in this Ivy League, environment, supposedly the best and the brightest, and I get called the N-word here. I don't want to be here. But because of the state board work, I was forced to go back. And then when I was approached about working with Jan Scarlett at Cornell, and my response to teaching shelter medicine was that I would teach at any veterinary college but Cornell. Please don't make me go back there. But there's wonderful people at Cornell, Jan Scarlett being one of them. And so you have to look at the bigger picture and say, if I can work with Jan and we can get shelter medicine off the ground at Cornell, which is the best veterinary, the #1 rated vet college in the country, if not the world, other universities will take notice. So you do things that push you beyond your comfort level or your sort of safety zone, because whether you want to or not, things that I do impact the future for other, people of color. And so I said, you got to get over this thing with Cornell. I'm on Cornell's advisory council right now. They asked me to join. And I said, I don't know what I could bring to the table, but in a recent discussion where they were talking about diversity, I brought up the question of, you've been trying to increase diversity for years now. Have you ever looked at your admissions criteria? And I've had conversations with other deans of vet schools and stuff. And I said, you have this this work requirement that it's an obstruction. It's difficult for, people like me who don't have family members who are veterinarians, who maybe have we never took our dog to the vet. I'd never been in a vet's office. I wanted to be a vet. I had never set foot in a vet's office. Didn't know what veterinarians do. I want to help animals. I love animals. This is what I want to do. And I said, so why do you have this work requirement? Do you have any studies that show that people with that work experience are better veterinarians? And to the dean's credit, he said, it's tradition. I said, so in a field that's evidence-based, where is your evidence that this makes a difference? And oddly enough, about the time when I was having this conversation with him, they published a study which looked at some of the barriers to admissions to the veterinary colleges, and one of them was the work requirement. They were saying that people that get admitted to vet school typically have applied to more than one vet school. Well, that would be a hardship for people who don't have the application fee to apply to 10 colleges. It's so expensive to go to the vet now. And, Michael Blackwell's doing amazing work with Align Care. And we've been talking about this for years, that we have to make veterinary care affordable, but we also have to make a veterinary education affordable. It's another huge stumbling block. If I'm looking now at becoming a veterinarian and seeing that I may graduate with $250,000 worth of debt, and that I'm going to be paying that back for the next 20, 25 years, but I could be a physician, or I could do something else and not have that educational debt and make as much, if not more money, how is that field going to be attractive to somebody who's first generation going to college, looking to make enough money to not only raise themselves out of poverty, but maybe, family members as well. So the access to care and the cost of veterinary education is critical issues. And I know Cornell is looking at that, as well as the entire profession. But when you're working in a shelter, you're saving hundreds of lives, maybe thousands of lives. You're really impacted. There's no greater feeling than seeing an animal in a cage that looks hopeless when somebody comes in and says, I want that animal. I'm going to save that animal's life. But I really think my advice would be, try, if you're selecting a vet school, look for a vet school that has a shelter medicine program, that has a shelter medicine rotation, a residency. Talk to shelter veterinarians. You can join the Association of Shelter Veterinarians, and you can see the discussions, you can have a dialogue. I don't want to glamorize it. You are going to be, sometimes in some shelters, we're still euthanizing animals because we've run out of cage space. And that's a hard, thing to grasp, or hard to deal with, but really get that experience. I want veterinary medicine to be inclusive. I want veterinarians to embrace our shelter animals. I want veterinarians to put animal welfare at the forefront, because the assumption is that veterinarians always have animal welfare at the top of their list of priorities. And unfortunately, as somebody said, veterinary medicine is probably 20% medicine and 80% business. I'd like to see that get reversed. I'd like to see the profession take the lead on animal welfare issues. We just recently created an animal welfare specialty in veterinary medicine. You can, it's amazing to me that they just added animal welfare to the veterinarian's oath, like within the last 10, maybe 15 years. I've lost track of time, but I really want everybody to recognize animals as being sentient. Veterinarians struggle with the idea of animals being property. That's a legal definition. Yet we believe that they're family members, and yet we make the distinction when it comes to providing health care for our furry friends. And certainly all of that gets tied in together. When we talk about animal welfare, we have to talk about taking care of people. so many veterinarians are focused on saying, I got into veterinary medicine to take care of animals, not the people. We've finally recognized that in order to take care of animals, we have to take care of people as well. And so that there's a very wide spectrum on how we as veterinarians need to do that. And so that, I think that's the challenge, for the future, making sure that all animals have access to veterinary care and that all people have access to the veterinary profession, and that we don't see these artificial barriers and obstacles that are put in the way. The issues surrounding diversity have always been a challenge for me. It's a complex topic, but to me, we've made it much more difficult than it needs to be. I think if you're sincere about it, we can do a lot of things. And it's not necessarily up to people of color to propose a solution. Okay, we have to be in this together. And when we talk about racism and power, people of color are not empowered to make the changes. So it has to be a sincere effort on the part of the people in power to affect change.
I think we just should be applauding Lila Miller for the next 35 or 40 years. Seriously, this has just been such an incredible experience. Lila, I want to thank you so much for sharing so much of your life and your life's journey with us. Your honesty, your integrity, it's just incredible. I don't know if I should tear my hair out in anger at the injustices that you've experienced, or just cheer you for the next 30 minutes because of all the obstacles that you have overcome. You just busted barriers like nobody's business. And it's such an honor to be here with you today. And there are a lot of people on the in the chat file who are just thanking you. They're so excited to be here, to hear you, to do all this. Julie had something great to say. Laura Lonzer, Sarah Pisano, Evie, Jesse Oldham, Jim Tedford, Kelly Cunningham, Stephanie Janesco, all of these people who just were bowing at your feet because you have done so much.
Well, I can't thank Maddie's Fund enough for this incredible honor and the accolades. And I think there's so many people like that were so instrumental in so much of the work that I was able to do. It's not a journey that, I took on my own. And certainly so many people at the ASPCA not only helped me, but introduced me to other people like Julie Levy. And I remember, Julie, you may remember this, when you were first starting the Operation Catnip, the grant came in to the ASPCA, and Julie Morris and I were looking at it, and Julie said to me, "What do you think?" And I said, "I don't know what she's trying to do, but it sounds exciting to me. Let's give her the money." It was just like, it was such an exciting time to have these, people with all of these incredible ideas and just working together to try to, see that they came to fruition. So I've been blessed being in the right place at the right time,
Oh, far more than that. Far more than that. But anyway, we'll definitely make a copy of the chat file so that you can have it. I mean, Dr. Blackwell is singing your praises and so appreciative of your friendship. So many people have echoed the same thing. Jane Hoffman, thank you to Lila and to Maddie's Fund. That is just so cool. So you gave us so much great information to deal with, and it's incredible that here we are 40 years later, as you've said, and we're still confronting the same issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Animal welfare continues to be a predominantly white sector, and figuring out different ways of making those changes. And I think at the end of your video, you talked about the fact that there should be partnerships of between white people and people of color coming together to work on the issues to affect change. Lila, talk to us more about that from your perspective.
Well, when I first went to Cornell back in 1973, I was asked that long ago to help recruit Black people to the veterinary college. And I refused. I said, I'm a student here. You have this assumption that somehow I know how to do this. If you're sincere about wanting to do this, then you need to hire people who are trained to go out and recruit students. I have a workload here where I don't have any time to spare to try to help you do this. And so to me, part of it is the sincerity. It's not enough to just reach out to people of color. You need to have people who are empowered, who are accomplished, who have some training. And so often we don't do that. We just say, well, let's just go and ask the nearest Black person or the nearest Asian person, who we all have different experiences. We all bring different, skills and backgrounds to the table. So you need to find the right person. And I go back to the YWCA, when they wanted to create program for Native Americans, they said, we want to reach out to our states where the reservations are located. We don't want to just get a social worker who's working with Native Americans. We want to get on the reservation. We want to talk to the people who need our services and find out what they need. And so often we don't do that. We have this notion that everybody comes from a collective background where everybody's experienced the same thing. Therefore, everybody knows how to solve these problems. When the Y wanted to create a program for Asian Americans, they embarked on a 6-week immersion into Asian studies. And they looked at different countries in Asia, and they identified issues. And then they selected people to create a team to actually go to Asia, the 3 Asian countries, and try to bring back information. And I'm saying that, there are things that we can do that can help us increase our commitment to diversity, because it's on the one hand, it's difficult, and on the other hand, it's not that difficult. When Cornell was looking for a professor to teach at the university, they went all the way to South Africa to recruit somebody. And I said, did you look at, Tuskegee was the veterinary college that most Black people were encouraged to go to. That's where, when I got the message, don't go to Cornell, I was told, go to Tuskegee. And why would I go all the way to Alabama? I'm from New York. But you could go all the way to South Africa, but did you reach out to Tuskegee? Did you reach out to, look for qualified people? And the notion that, if you are doing affirmative action, you're not getting qualified people. And when I said in the video that I wasn't a product of affirmative action, it's because when I got to Cornell, they hadn't identified me as being Black. A lot of the Black students came in a special educations program. When I got there and started meeting other Black people, and are you a COSEP student? I was like, COSEP, what is that? So I just came in on my own because of my commitment to getting into Cornell. But, it's again, when you start looking at how do you recruit people, there's people that are trained to do it, but you have to really want them to be there. And it's not enough to just have them be there. I can't tell you how many times I gave ideas. I said, if you want to, and I have to give credit to Steve Zawistowski, when he was looking for a humane educator to work for the ASPCA, he went to the historically Black colleges to try to recruit there, because he was sincere in wanting that to happen. So I think we have to question, how sincere are we about doing this? And when we talk about inclusion, you have to have a comfort level that where you've been invited to sit at the table, you're going to be listened to. And it's very difficult when people assume that you're a representative of all Black people or all Asian people, of all Jewish people, of, of all people of whatever, subset you're looking at. We have individual opinions that may be reflective of the greater group, but are not necessarily, this is the be all and the end all. So I've been in many, many, many situations where I was the only Black person there, and really trying to decide, should I really say what I'm thinking? Do they really want to hear what I'm thinking? And I have to tell you, there's so many times when I didn't say what I wanted to say, because you also, as a Black person, you have this fear of being the angry Black person. That was one of the things that you would hear people say about Obama that he never showed emotion, because that would be, you don't want to be the angry Black person. And I think we're reaching to the point now where we're tired of not being the angry Black person. Maybe it's time to start being a little bit angry, and to start being honest, and to stop worrying about how your opinions are going to be received. And so it's a real tightrope. It was a real balancing act that I've had to do virtually all of my life when I've been put in these situations of, do I do more harm than good if I turn people off, if they are turned off to what I'm, who I am, rather than what I'm saying. One thing you will know about me, I will talk forever. I'll give you one other example. When I was very, and I still am, I'm very active with the American Association of Veterinary State Boards, because they advocate on behalf of the public and not just the veterinary profession. And so I was rising through the ranks. I was a director, I was a secretary, and then it came my turn to be president. And so they wanted to nominate me for the presidency, and I turned it down. And they asked me why. And I said, because we're at a pivotal point in these programs where we're trying to really make some effective changes in how the state boards act. And unfortunately, the reaction is not going to be to the program, it's going to be to me. It's such a conservative profession, is that, if a Black woman is advocating for these things, people won't accept it. And the nominating, oh, that's not true, that's not true. And there was one member of the committee who said, Lila's absolutely right. If you want to get your agenda passed, she can't be president, because she can't do the networking. She can't do the old boy network stuff, going to the bars and where all the decisions are being made. And a lot of this stuff is just not going to happen because she's presenting it. It's that kind of honesty that is unfortunate, but it was true, that, so you have to pick and choose, where can I be more effective? I can support somebody else as, the president, to help him get the agenda passed. And so, it's making those decisions as well. It's recognizing that, DEI, you may be like the figurehead, or we've got a Black president, but we're not going to work with him. So, and I think we've seen that, unfortunately, too frequently. And I don't want to see that happen with animal welfare and veterinary medicine. I mean, despite the fact that veterinary medicine is so racially segregated, we have 3 African-American deans at veterinary colleges during my career, which was always amazing to me. So you can achieve that, but how does you get that to trickle down into the profession itself?
Thanks, Lila. And I think somewhere in that we have the title of your memoirs to be written, for sure. So I'd like to open it up. Would anybody like to unmic and either share a question or a comment with Dr. Miller? Please feel free to do so.
I have a question. What do you think the biggest changes in veterinary medicine that you've seen in the past 30 or 40 years? As far as, I don't know, oh, now I get to use this fantastic piece of equipment, or, something to do with, biggest changes with technology in veterinary medicine.
The biggest change in veterinary medicine has been the feminization of the profession. Because remember, when I went, it was predominantly male, and for it to totally flip now where it's predominantly female. I applaud the use of technology, but it also, I think, doesn't always work in our favor, because a lot of the technology has increased the cost of veterinary care and just put it out of reach. I mean, I took my cat to a veterinarian colleague of mine who used to work for me at the ASPCA. And when she gave me the bill, I said to her, this is a mistake. It's too much. And she's like, Lila, I gave you the professional discount. I gave you the friendship discount. I didn't charge. She started listing all the stuff she didn't charge before. And the bill was unbelievable. And a lot of that comes from all of this technology that has made veterinary care more expensive. It's made veterinarians afraid to practice medicine the way that I learned to practice medicine, which is, and one of the reasons I wanted to work at a place like the ASPCA, because so many people can't afford all of the bells and whistles. And so, it's really come down to, there's the gold standard of care and there's a silver standard of care. And so often, we feel if we don't get the gold standard, it's malpractice or it's incompetence, but it's recognizing that, people want to give their animals a chance. I'm all in favor of telehealth, if that can help bring down the cost of veterinary care. I think that, this is a huge problem for us. And when I was running the clinic at the ASPCA back in the 80s, that was an issue that we knew then that people couldn't afford veterinary care. And we had a lot more flexibility. Now, the way the students are being educated, they're so reliant on technology and not kind of the basic physical exam history. And let's see what we can do to provide good care without having people make these devastating choices between, I can't afford to save my pet's life.
Thanks, Lila. Alexandra, it looks like you have a question.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much for having me on here. Amazing story, Dr. Miller. I've been a veterinarian technician here in Miami, Florida. I happen to be a Hispanic male technician on top of that. And your story is just filled with so many, how can I say, so many things I can relate on so many levels. And I'm just thankful for veterinarians like yourself being out there and telling these stories, because it's the same thing that I'm doing now for my technicians, giving them my story, giving them my insight, especially now with something amazing that I have coming to market. And I planned on following in you all's footsteps and doing everything I possibly can to give back to the shelter community, and especially for having some type of a fund set up where if people have cases that unfortunately the clients cannot pay for those type of services, I definitely want my company to be able to give those funds for cases like that. And it all stems with the goodness of my heart from being in the trenches and being in the field, and unfortunately seeing that side where people did not have the money to pay for the certain treatments, and us technicians will pool our monies together to get those treatments paid. And I'm just so thankful for listening to your story, and keep doing what you're doing. I'm with you 100%, and I'm definitely going to follow you guys on LinkedIn, and just thank you for allowing me to speak.
Yeah, and I have to give a shout out to Michael Blackwell with what he's doing with Align Care. And I've known Michael for years. He's the most amazing, most accomplished veterinarian. He's just incredible. And I remember when he and I first started talking about this, and we brainstormed a lot. And he said, it was one of those things where he said, I'm going to do this. And he's followed through. He has made amazing progress, funding from Maddie's fund, but addressing this very important issue of people don't have access to the care and they love their pets. When I was asked to speak at a program called Summit for the Animals years and years ago, and they asked me, why don't Black people care about their pets? Why don't they bond with their animals? And I said, where did you get that from? How are you measuring the bond? I live in Harlem, and I love seeing people with their pets, with their little coats and their boots, and you see them giving their animals treats and working and playing. Somebody published a study years ago, apparently, that said that, Black people were afraid of animals. And I said, where, you got one study, who did you study? I have one close friend of mine, a childhood friend, that told me he was afraid of dogs. And that was because of our dog, that little dog Tippy that was in the video. Oh, that was a nasty little dog. He was the meanest. My mother always talked about how great he was. I said, no, Ma, I love that dog to death, but he's a nasty little dog. He hated other dogs. When kids came to play with us, we had to, lock him up. We couldn't, let him loose around people. But, it really, we cared about that dog. And when I said we'd never taken him to the vet, well, we took him to the vet when he got sick. And I never forget, the bill was $52. They told us we could come pick the dog up. Then they called us and told us, oh, we made a mistake. We misdiagnosed it and he died. And that was it. And I said, but we tried. Michael's program is so critical to getting not just the care to the people that need it, but making the profession understand. We still have veterinarians that are saying that, having a pet is a privilege. If you can't afford it, you shouldn't have one. I said, it's not that they can't afford the pet, they can't afford the vet bills. So I'm not telling them that they need to lower their fees, but we need to have some type of mechanism in place so that these people can get care for their animals, because they love their animals. You measure the bond. What are the questions they were asking? Do you celebrate your dog's birthday? Does your dog sleep in the bed with you? Does your dog go on vacation with you? Well, my family didn't go on vacation. What are you talking about? My dog had his own bed. He didn't have to sleep in the bed with us. So, it speaks to so many of the stereotypes and the misinformation and misconceptions that just keep getting passed along and passed down, that we just need to really take the time to investigate. And to me, again, it's a willingness to share power. So often that's what stops things in its tracks, is this idea that if we share power, we have to lose power. And that's not what it's about.
Lila, I think Dr. Blackwell, can you unmute? I'm sure you have a few words to say.
Oh, is he on? I didn't know he was here.
Hello, my friend.
Oh, hey. That's so exciting to see you.
I was a few minutes late due to another meeting, but I caught the gist of what you shared. I just wanted to acknowledge how much I appreciate all that you've accomplished. And no disrespect to others here, but as a minority, I do appreciate the path that you've had to travel, and especially given some of the stories that you shared today and a few others that you've shared with me. That makes you extra strong and extra special to be able to not only navigate the path, but to help transform our profession and of course our society. Every time we've had a conversation, you've been very inspiring, and I appreciate that about you, because along the way there have been naysayers, where I've had the conversations about access to veterinary care, and they see a million problems, but you are always that positive minded, we can do this person, and I appreciate that, Lila. I'm gonna look forward to seeing you at some meeting somewhere. Do our usual.
I'm so happy to see you. I'm so glad, and I'm so proud of you for Aligned Care. I knew you could do it. And
well, thank you for the shout out.
Yeah.
You've been there from the beginning. Strong encouragement.
Awesome. Hey, we have time for one more, and I think Laura Lanza, you wanted to say something, so why don't you go ahead and unmute?
Laura.
I love you so much. Listening to this has just brought back so many memories and just why you've always been my hero. But there are a couple of things that you brought to attention. I'm still working at 76 with a nonprofit organization that assists with spay, neuter, and emergency medical care. And when I look at the applications that are turned down, I actually follow up with a letter explaining why we are not able to help everyone that requests funding. But I send them other resources around the country that they can research and try to find help. But it is very scary when I look at some of those applications that the estimate is $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. And luckily, our medical counselor has been doing this for over 35 years, and she knows where she can send someone that might be able to be a little cheaper, still wonderful veterinarian care, and then we're able to assist. The other thing, Lila, that I would love to see you address shortly, I know, you and I would talk forever, but the trips you took throughout the South and the country over the last 40 years of going to the physical animal shelters and the differences as we professionalized in the 70s, 80s, 90s into the 2000s, with veterinarians actually working at animal shelters, open admission animal shelters, as well as the new rise of the no-kill shelters. Can you share some of those stories of what you experienced in watching the changes?
Yeah, one of my concerns about shelter medicine was really to ensure that we recognize that there's no one model of a shelter. So you have some shelters that have multiple resources, and then you have, shelters that really are still struggling. And as I said, some are still euthanizing for space. And I think one of my goals was not necessarily to just train veterinarians to be shelter veterinarians, but to train veterinarians in their practices to be more sympathetic to what's happening in their local shelter. And to not just, if somebody adopted a pet from the shelter and they brought it to, the vet's office, for that vet to just say, well, you got it from the shelter, what do you expect? It's sick, take it back. To recognize the value of that animal's life. Because I also, one of the things that struck me was how an animal suddenly loses its value if it doesn't have an owner. 1 minute it's got an owner and it's revered and has worth. It doesn't have an owner, it has no worth. It's trying to get veterinarians to embrace that and understand that, there are a lot of shelters, and not just in the South, but there are a lot of shelters that are very, have scarce resources, but that are still trying to do a good job, and are still fighting, some of the battles that we were fighting, back in the 70s and 80s. And we're blessed now that we do have more science, we do have more resources, but recognizing that, there's some shelters, particularly, as you said, in the South and in other areas of the country, that just haven't been able to keep up. And how do we help them as well? I think in some ways we need to return to some of our grassroots efforts, and recognize that not everybody's in the same place.
Lila, thank you so much for today. This has just been an incredible experience for all of us. I think we all feel changed as a result of this. So please, I would encourage everybody to go to the Maddie's Pet Forum to hear more from Lila. And again, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Miller.
Well, thank you. This was like homecoming for me to see so many of my friends that we haven't been able to see since the pandemic, and not having, person-to-person conferences. So this has really been a spectacular event for me. So thank you. And thank everybody for attending. It's amazing to see such a turnout.